You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. In case you've blissfully managed not to notice, it's an election year, and an historic one, and a bizarre one at that. By the way, welcome aboard to Bernie Sanders. Better late than never. My guests today are both women who can help us maneuver through this confusion and madness. The first is a writer and statistical expert who's going to literally decode polling and polls for us, demystifying methods and explaining, in English, results. This is highly valuable, especially in such a year as this, where polls have often seemed to confuse more than clarify things. The second, a feminist, former Republican Party insider, is a whistleblower who will give us context for the far-right takeover of her party, which led to today's Trumpism, and she'll tell us her hopes, if any, for the future of the GOP. But first, we're going to go inside the headlines. You can smell it and taste it. Fear. Of violence, of terrorists, from cops, by cops, from other citizens. You can see the fear in average citizens who express it along with shock and grief in all the makeshift memorials where they leave teddy bears, flowers, candles, scribbled notes, superstitious tokens, offerings to the dead by those left alive and afraid for themselves. I confess I am no longer moved by these memorials, by all the moments of silence, the cliches, from chants like "no justice, no peace," to murmurs like "I'm sorry for your loss" and "thank you for your service," and speeches that proclaim we must open a dialogue, hold another public hearing, we must unify. You know, we perform these rites and mouth these platitudes by rote now, while nothing seems to change, and in fact a grotesquely racist, serious presidential contender talks about his being the law and order candidate. Living with fear? Well, a new study by the Center for Policing Equity confirms that in interactions between police and civilians when force is used, the race of the person being stopped by officers is significant, and found that although officers employ force in less than 2% of all police-civilian interactions, the use of police force is disproportionately high for African Americans, more than 3 times greater than for European Americans. We've known this all along, haven't we? Though it's useful to have definitive proof. Fatal shootings by police are up in the first 6 months of 2016 nationwide, according to an ongoing 2-year study by the Washington Post. This year has also seen more officers shot and killed in the line of duty and more officers prosecuted for questionable shootings. But despair can paralyze us, so it is vital to notice what little has changed. One change is the presence of technology, including new live streaming services and apps that offer the ability not just to record but to broadcast events as they unfold. So important has citizen documentation of police encounters become that the American Civil Liberties Union and other such groups have created smartphone apps to allow onlookers to observe, record, and report on-the-spot evidence. Another change is the growing number of police chiefs who are African American, like Atlanta's Chief George Turner, who openly says he has had moments himself of fearing police when he's not in uniform, or Dallas Police Chief David Brown, whose own son killed and was killed by a cop. Such a crossover of realities is one everyone needs not just to hear, but to listen to. They are the translators, whose insights can open the way toward change to what used to be called community control in policing. As an ironic aside, the Dallas shooter, Micah Johnson, reportedly wanted to be a cop. He also was reportedly discharged from the Army after sexually harassing a female soldier who characterized him as severely disturbed and even had to file a protective order against him. There it is again, the canary in the mine, an abused woman offstage in the wings of a killer's onstage life. In fact, the third element of change in these tragedies is composed of women. the wives, girlfriends, mothers, sisters, daughters of citizens slain by cops, and cops slain by citizens. They're coming forth, and nothing can stop them now. Leslie McSpadden, the mother of Michael Brown, now dead almost 2 years, wrote an op-ed about how other mourning mothers, Sabrina Fulton, Wanda Johnson, so many more, help each other survive. Many of them have been traveling the country, funded by Hillary's campaign, to speak out against the proliferation of guns and for changes in the criminal justice system. Each mother bleeds fresh blood from old wounds when joined by someone new. McSpadden writes, "We mothers are expected to say something to help keep the peace. But what can I say? We wake up and go to sleep with this pain every day. Ain't no peace." For that matter, when we intone names of Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin and Walter Scott and Oscar Grant III and so many other black men, and now Alton Sterling and Philando Castile, I, for one, will not forget the names of Renisha McBride and Natasha McKenna and Tanisha Anderson and Rekia Boyd and Sandra Bland and all the other black women who died at the hands of police. And these deaths must not also be dismissively memorialized, not even while the nation mourns the death of 5 European-American police officers in Dallas, Lauren Ahrens, Michael Kroll, Michael Smith, Brent Thompson, Patrick Zamaripa, and grieves with their widows and mothers, not even while we pay tribute to the surviving white Dallas cops who were severely wounded by the sniper, including a woman officer, Misty McBride, age 32. But I'll tell you where their hope is. Hope is Diamond Reynolds, the young Minnesota woman who made the world bear witness to the murder of her boyfriend, Philando Castile, by keeping her smartphone's live streaming app rolling while he bled to death beside her. In a staggering show of courage and calm, with her 4-year-old daughter in the back seat, Reynolds kept streaming, not just tears, but information. Even when addressing the officer who had just killed the man she loved, she called the cop, "Sir, you shot 4 bullets into him, sir. He was just getting his license and registration, sir," so that the cop wouldn't shoot her too. Even when she finally gave in to the horror, screaming, sitting handcuffed in the back of a police car, her little girl stepped up to try and bring comfort, saying, "It's okay, Mommy. I'm right here with you." We know about the little girl because Mommy kept the app streaming. I, for one, will believe this country is serious about change when the budget for materiel to militarize local police departments is spent instead on more intensive training programs for police officers. I'll believe it when the underlying conditions of crime in any community are addressed by massive WPA-type programs to address poverty and establish quality education. I'll believe this country is serious about racism when it so resoundingly defeats the hatred promulgated by Donald Trump that the message is clear. It doesn't have to be this way. I live in New York City's Greenwich Village, where during Gay Pride weekend this June, the police cars were painted in rainbow colors with slogans reading, "We mourn for Orlando." These weren't just temporary decorations, mind you. They weren't decals or paste-ons. The cars had been repainted, and most of the officers wore rainbow ribbons right at the street corner where decades earlier cops had beaten and brutalized gay rights demonstrators. That did make me cry, only because it was evidence of change. But fear of change is the fear at the heart of all this tragedy, as is the fear not that we are different, but the fear that we really are all the same. I'm not comparing homophobia to racism or either one to sexism because I find any competition of suffering a failure of ethical nerve. But this did remind me that individuals can change, cops can change, communities can change. We can change this climate of fear, change it in the streets, in the legislatures, at home and at work, and at the ballot box. But the time grows shorter in which to do it. Meanwhile, we have to keep streaming, not the tears, but the information and the political will. We have to pause for just a moment. I'm Robin Morgan. This is Women's Media Center Live. And if you've ever wondered about polls, are they really fair? Which ones are biased? Which ones have a reputation for being accurate and which ones don't? How do you make head or tails out of the damn things, polls? Well, stay tuned, because our next guest knows all about that and how to get the truth and the facts out of all the murk and the mystery.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. My first guest today is Clare Malone, who is a freelance writer. She's been a member of the editorial staff of The New Yorker. She's had her work appear in the American Prospect, the Daily Beast, Slate, and lots of other places. And she is the senior political writer for 538. And 538, if you don't know about it, or if happily you do, is what we're going to discuss today. Clare Malone. Clare Malone, welcome to the program. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
538 is a really terrific website. 538, spelled out in words, F-I-V-E, etc. 538.com. It is the sort of a go-to place for online for statistical analyses. It's facts. It's not punditry and it's not opinions. It's real facts. How about that? The earth is not flat. And it's an analysis of statistics. I guess the one of the original parents was Nate Silver. And it started as a blog, and then it was part of the New York Times, which is where I first came across it and fell in love with it. And now it's back in the blogosphere as well as the Times. And it's if you want real facts, not filtered, but analyzed as to what they mean, this is the place to go. And you are one of the senior political writers, am I correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. And you, two pieces in particular, I like your work so much, but two pieces in particular seem so important. One back in March where was the sort of, what the hell is going on with Trump? And the other piece more recently is the one from 1937 to Hillary Clinton, How Americans Have Felt About a Woman President, which alternately had me gnashing my teeth and shouting hooray. So, take on the first one first, the Trump.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why Trump was the piece, and it was sort of born out of, when you're reporting on a primary election, you're sort of, it's a very sort of peripatetic life, right? You're in one state and then the next one, and there's tons of rallies, and everything sort of feels like campaign weeks sort of feel like dog years, I think, right? You
Sure.
feel like lots of stuff has happened. And so why Trump was really born out of me just trying to make sense of it. And I did it sort of in the form of a travel log and sort of trying to, for a while people were saying, well, Trump support only exists in this part of the country or that part of the country. And to me, it was becoming very apparent, not only that he had pretty strong support among the Republican electorate, but that even people who weren't, initial Trump supporters, he was sort of becoming normalized. And I wanted to know why that was.
Yeah.
And, so I tried to do it with a mix of sort of our staff. I think it's no secret that while, our polling models sort of, always called that Trump was leading, a lot of the humans, who write for us, along with everyone else, couldn't quite believe that Trump was happening. Right. And so I tried to use a mix of, the stats and polls that we had on hand, political science, and then just also sort of, old school, what I saw in front of my eyes. And a lot of it was, the sort of big takeaways that I had was one, Trump voters, I think that people can often be, a bit derisive about someone who's voting for Trump. But to me, it's a pretty, if there's one good thing about this election, it's sort of the idea that, there are a lot of ugly things associated with Trumpism, lots of racism, things like that. But the idea that there is a certain demographic of people who really do feel sort of, strangulated in maybe a modern American society, like their voice isn't out there.
Yeah.
And so these people have sort of found a voice with Trump. And we kind of, there's a lot of political science that says, people aren't ideological, right? There's a certain, they sort of like the patina of conservatism or the patina of liberalism. And they'll sort of vote for a candidate who they sort of feel is like them. And so what Trump has really done well is sort of reconstituted this sense of white identity. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily white nationalism, right? You could be something more, I guess, benign than that, right? With someone who just says, this is, we found that Trump support is really big in places that have a high preponderance of people who identify their ethnicity as American, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And other things that we found were, even with media consumption, right? Not that Trump supporters weren't reading the news, weren't paying attention to the race. It's more that it's not that they're uninformed, they're misinformed. The idea that
right.
In the past decade, the way that we consume our media has become so siloed, bifurcated, whatever, we're choosing news. And I think a lot of people know that. But this election has really, it's sort of become an echo chamber that reinforced. What is it about this guy who, on the face of it, a lot of us find unappealing? And by the way, a lot of Trump supporters find him a bit off-putting, right?
Yeah, yeah. And yet they'll say, yeah, that was racist and that was bad and that was frightening and that was scary and I'm for him. I mean, yeah. It leaves me totally crazed.
We've come to expect public figures to be very, glossed when they head into public. They say certain things, they hit certain marks, and Americans are smart. They know that a lot of this is,
right.
It's almost kabuki a bit. And so I think the idea that Trump was like sort of spouting the political views that like, your Uncle Joe might spout at a barbecue.
But if your Uncle Joe is psychotic, I mean, and do you want your Uncle Joe's finger on the nuclear trigger? I mean,
right, which is a very valid, question. Yeah, but elections are funny because if you were interviewing for any other job, you would be, straight up looking at someone's resume and the rigor. And this election sort of seems to have become a runaway train of that. I mean, that trend that Americans don't like someone who's been in elected office for a while,
right? Or who's intelligent, or who's educated, or who knows the issue. They wouldn't want to wander into an operating room for if they were sick and have Joe Schmo operate on them. They'd want the best surgeon they could get. Somehow, right. This doesn't qualify in that same batch. It's a fascinating piece, and I urge you listeners to go back to it at 538.com and check out what about Trumpism by Clare Malone. But let's go on to the other one now. 64% of Americans in 1937, by the Gallup poll, said no, they would not vote for a woman for president. Only 33% said yes, and 3% had no opinion. And then a February 2007 Gallup poll showed that 88% of Americans would vote for a woman if their party elected one. So right. I guess the women's movement had made a dent, huh?
It worked to a certain point. Yeah, so this piece was written, it's something I'd sort of been thinking about for a while, actually having discovered a trove of Virginia Slims, the cigarette company, Virginia Slims, for years and years.
I remember. I remember protesting against it, yes.
But it's actually sort of a fascinating trove of information over decades about how women felt.
Right.
So
right.
So we had, so it was in this the Roper Center has this historic library of polls, and so I started I had stumbled across this and researched for another article and sort of put it in my pocket for sort of what I thought was probably the inevitable Clinton win, and just the idea of I was actually surprised that Gallup, which was founded in 1935 by George Gallup, I was really surprised that 2 years after its founding, it did ask this question:
yeah.
Would you vote for a woman for president? That was a stroke of luck for me, and I'm glad George Gallup asked it. but we were able to chart pretty well over the decades how Americans felt. Now, the wording of the question changed slightly. The initial question was, would you vote for a woman for president if she was qualified in every other respect? Mm-hmm. And that's the poll where 64% of Americans said no. They changed it slightly over time. They said if the party, by 1945, the question was, if the party whose candidate you most often support nominated a woman, would you vote for her if she was qualified for the job? And then 55% of Americans were still saying no, but I think the approval, the party stamp of approval helped a little bit. But it is pretty interesting to see over time, Americans changing about, in their views of whether or not a woman was, able to hold this kind of office. But also, I sort of coupled it with the way Americans were over time, starting in the 70s, how the people were thinking about their sex lives, prejudice against women in obtaining loans and mortgages, which I thought was, I'm a younger woman,
right?
And these are things that I took for granted when I was younger. But looking back, this stuff wasn't happening all that long before I was born. 56% of women felt discriminated against in obtaining loans, mortgages, and charge accounts on their own. That was 1974. So,
Right.
Not so long ago.
Right, exactly. And that same year, you wrote 60% of women said they preferred to stay at home and take care of their families rather than have an outside job. By 1985, 51% preferred to have an outside job. And this one I found fascinating, that in 74, 54% of women agreed with the statement that, quote, premarital sexual intercourse is immoral, close quote.
Yeah.
And the share was down to 49% in 1985 and 46% in 1990. And yay! By the 1995 survey, the question wasn't asked anymore, which is the most revealing. Yeah.
I kind of wonder what it would be now, though. I mean, it was interesting to me that the question had been excised, but then I was sort of like, well, where are we now in 2016?
Well, there speaks a political scientist and a statistician, indeed. And you ended this piece because you're being a very objective statistician, political scientist, reporter, good writer, but something creeps out at the very two last lines. It ends with, American women were granted the right to vote 96 years ago. We have been walking the earth for about 200,000 years now, period.
But I'd say, especially if you're a woman, and no matter what political party you ascribe to, it's a big deal that a woman is a major nominee. And
kinda.
Yeah. And the paragraph in this piece, that I wrote just before I said, we were granted the vote 96 years ago, I sort of list the number of women who are in elective office in the United States, the number of mayors, the number of women serving in state legislatures.
Right.
And it's leaps and bounds, over the past couple of decades. But there are obviously still, tons and tons of barriers. There's tons of sort of ingrained sexism that men have, not just men, but women have about themselves. I wrote a piece earlier in the year about why not as many, the conditions under which women tend to run for office. Mm-hmm. And it's often when they are much, 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 much more qualified than their male contemporaries. It's when they've held lower political office, like a city councilwoman's job, something like that.
Right.
Women
backwards and in high heels.
Exactly.
And tell me one last question. Just the other day, I believe it was Nate Silver came out with, and he has almost never been wrong. I mean, polls can come and go, but the analysis at 538 has always been remarkably, on the nose. So it's trustable. And he came out with a statement that he thought Hillary Clinton, was an 80% chance of winning.
Right. So this is our election forecast, and I'd really urge people to check it out on our site. And it's not just Nate. It's sort of what we do this thing called the model, right? So it's our forecast for who's going to win in November. And right now, Hillary Clinton's chances, given state polls from every single state that we've weighed based on what we feel is a good poll and not a good poll. And right now, Clinton has a 79.2% chance as of but I will be the sort of the cautious person and say that's not a 100% chance that she is winning. Donald Trump has a 20.7% chance winning the election in November. And these things change over time, obviously. I would,
right.
I would urge, it's kind of a fun interactive, right? If you're the kind of person who wants, there are a couple of states this year that might sort of be in play that haven't been in play for the past couple elections, places like Arizona, which has typically
right.
gone Republican in the past couple of years, but perhaps some Hispanic voters there, Latino voters there will feel a bit more the fire at their feet. So I would urge people to sort of check it out, and we can look for post conventions, but we try as much as possible to sort of keep our dirty hands off the data and sort of let the numbers and state polls speak for themselves.
It's 538 spelled out in words. Obviously, all as if all one word. 538.com, and it's just terrific. And the use of polls is very sophisticated and fair, and the analysis is really, really helpful. So I urge people to go to that site and keep going there, or subscribe to it and get it in your RSS feed. Thank you, Clare, for your work, which is really terrific. And thanks for being with us on Women's Media Center Live.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
And now it's time to visit the Surrealism Corner. New statistics about millennials. So younger people, particularly hearing this, perk up. Millennials, those Americans now between 16 and 36 years old, are, often spoken of as if they're ushering in a whole new era of enlightened personal relations. And in an interesting article in the Harvard Business Review by Andrea Kramer and Alton Harris, they quote that although in 2013 Time magazine predicted millennials would save us all because they're so much more accepting of differences in everyone, nonetheless, new studies have pointed out quite the opposite. Do millennials really believe there are inherently no female or male roles in society? And do millennial men really see women as equals? Well, the best information now uncovered indicates the answer to both questions is no. Earlier this year, researchers at the National Institutes of Health published a study on how college biology students view their classmates' intelligence and achievements, and the researchers found that male students systematically overestimated the knowledge of the men in their classes in comparison with the women. Moreover, as the academic term progressed, the men's faulty appraisal of their classmates' abilities increased despite clear evidence, guys, of the women's superior class performance. In every biology class examined, a man was considered the most renowned student, even when a woman had far better grades. In contrast, the female students surveyed did not show bias, accurately evaluating their colleague students based on performance. This is really dispiriting. So millennial men's views of women's intelligence and ability even extend to women in senior leadership positions. In a 2014 survey of more than 2,000 U.S. adults, a Harris poll found that young men were less open to accepting women leaders than older men were. Only 41% of millennial men were comfortable with women engineers, compared to 65% of men 65 or older. Likewise, only 43% of millennial men were comfortable with women being U.S. senators, compared to 64% of Americans overall. Moreover, according to a 2013 Pew survey of Americans, millennial women are significantly more likely than older women to say that the country continues to need change-making to bring about equality in the workplace. And millennial men, well, they're the group most likely to say, "Nope, it's done, it's over, all necessary changes have been made." Furthermore, whereas 3/4 of millennial women anticipate that their careers will be at least as important as their partners' careers, half the men in their generation expect that their careers will take priority. This could lead to problems. Fewer than half of millennial women believed that they would have to handle most of the child care, but 2/3 of their male peers believed that their wives would do so. So, the millennial generation and men who come to prominence as they age out of it seem as if they might hinder rather than advance current efforts to reduce discriminatory practices of gender. That is surreal. We better get with it and hold their feet to the fire, millennial sisters. It's time for a break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, but I'll be right back with a principled, strong, feminist, wait for it, Republican woman who will tell us how the party got to this stage and where it might go from here. So don't go anywhere. Stay with us.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again. In just 2 days, the Republican National Convention begins. My next guest, Tanya Melich, that's Melich, attended every Republican National Convention as a Republican delegate from the years 1952 through 1996, with the exception of the year 1984. She served on the staffs of Governor Nelson Rockefeller, Senator Jacob Javits, and Charles Goodell, and John Lindsay. She co-founded the National Women's Political Caucus and was an early leader of the National Women's Education Fund, which focused on educating women in gaining political power. She was one of the feminists fighting at the 1988 Republican National Convention in New Orleans to try to remove the anti-choice plank from the party platform, unsuccessfully. And years later, she wrote about her experiences at the convention in a book, which she titled, coining the phrase herself, The Republican War Against Women, an Insider's Report from Behind the Lines. Here is insider Tanya Melich to tell us what to expect in the next few days and beyond for the once grand old party. Tanya Melich, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you, Robin. I've been listening to you for a long time and reading your Ms. stuff for years, so I thank you for inviting me to talk with you today.
Well, thank you for being with us. You are a brave woman. You're not only one of the founders of the National Women's Political Caucus, but you're still a recovering Republican, a lapsed Republican who fought the good feminist fight for so long in the Republican Party and then finally had to give up and leave. So tell us about that. And you wrote a wonderful book about it also, too, which is simply, you came up with the phrase, The Republican War Against Women. And the book is still around and available and updated. It came out first 20 years ago or something like that, yes?
That's right. It came out in February of 96.
But it's now updated and available, and I just recently reread it, and it really takes you inside where no one has boldly gone before. Because I remember, Tanya, women like Jill Ruckelshaus and Mary Crisp and you and that they were sisters. I may have differed with them or others on, certain other aspects, but we were all feminists together. And to see your party leave you was heartbreaking. So, I know in the book you talk about Reagan and Bush, and that being the beginning and the solidification of the end, and then Gingrich being a huge blow. But in short form, give our listeners a taste of how you think this happened to a sane party originally.
Well, I think having now 20 years of perspective since the book came out, and when my editor and I decided we would go with Republican War Against Women, and I went on my book tour, I was attacked for using the word misogynist, and I remember there was this anger, and Bill Clinton was president at the time, and I began to think, what really caused all of this? And the movement that nominated Reagan started with Goldwater, And so there was something already in place. But Herbert Walker Bush was, to me, the real villain of what happened, because they turned against us, the Republican women, with men. Every time we turn around to change the rules to include more women in the delegate selection, or we try to put a reasonable platform in about women's issues, we'd get cut off. And often it turned out later that it was people who were supposed to be moderates, but really weren't. And as I said, H.W., I think, was the one who was the worst. We already knew what Reagan was, but we didn't expect that H.W. would be the way he was.
That's so interesting. And when I reread the book recently, I had this same reaction of thinking, yes, and he, Papa Bush, has the reputation, of course, of being the gentleman and the nice one, and the rational one, and the friend to all. And if only we could go back to him and his style. And the book exposes what he really did, which was disastrous for women. And the party was there for the women on the ERA before the Democrats were.
That's right. And if you know your women's history, you know that Susan B. and Elizabeth Cady were more supportive of the Republicans in the 19th century because of abolition and right. We all know that. But
right.
To me, the other interesting thing was Bob Dole's campaign in 1974. Where he was running for Senate, and he'd always been someone that people thought was a supporter of a woman's right to choose, and he was married to Elizabeth Dole, and he negotiated so that he could get on the ticket to be in place later on to be a president. So what I'm pointing out is Dole and also H.W., it was all about selling, I think, women down the tube so they could become the president. That's what it was about.
Yeah, but those backroom meetings that were taking place while Republican feminists were fighting the good fight, playing by the rules, lobbying, organizing, doing, it's just so heartbreaking to go back and to reread that, and then look at today. They are reaping what they have sown, because they've been
absolutely
invoking Trump for years, and now they don't know what to do with him.
Well, and that, on the point of Trump, I live in New York, you live in New York City, and we have known about Donald Trump since the 80s. The New York media has known about him. If I were managing a campaign for one of those other Republican presidential candidates, why didn't they start after him after he announced in June of last year? Yeah. The idea that they never took this man seriously is just astounding to me.
Yeah, well, they were, I think, or perhaps you tell me otherwise, they were supposedly afraid of, quote, alienating, unquote, any of his followers. And there comes a point where you take a stand, over these outrageous, he's an equal opportunity hater, I'll say that. It's women, it's Muslims, it's people of color, it's disabled people, it's old people, it's young people, he doesn't discriminate in terms of who he hates. This must make you crazy, absolutely crazy, to see the once great party devolve to this. How do you deal with that?
Well, I went down and changed my registration because I kept being identified as a Republican, and I said the time has come to leave the party, and I left the party. And I'm a registered independent, but because of all the fights in the Democratic Party where you have to select during a primary, I think I'll go down and become a Democrat. Might as well do it. And as far as the two-party system and Trump, you've seen the list of the numbers of people who are not going to speak at the convention. So what's going to happen? I lived through the 1964 Goldwater fiasco, and Goldwater was a man that people in the Senate, D's and R's, respected, and he was destroyed by LBJ. I'm talking about that campaign. This is much worse than 1964. So the governors, Republican governors, mayors, senators, I saw that Elsie Stepanek, who is one of the youngest Republican members of the Congress, who represents the area north of Albany up to the Canadian border, she's not going to the convention.
Yeah. Well, I don't blame them. It's like a living nightmare for anybody who is vaguely principled Republican. What do you think will happen with the stop Trump or trying to move him out and put somebody else in. One hears about all of that, but you know the machinations behind the scenes. I mean, what's your take? Is there such a real drive, and could it succeed?
No, on the base question of Donald Trump being nominating, assuming we don't have any major surprises, he has the votes and he will be the nominee. However, the Republican Party sets its rules for the next convention at the previous convention. This is how the Reagan strategy and the Southern strategy took over. It started way back in 1960 when the rules were changed by some of the Goldwater, Bill Buckley, Bill Rusher people to be sure that when they got to 64, if they won in the primaries, they could control the convention. So you look at Ted Cruz, who has the most delegates, who has not, as far as I know, come out for Trump. And the bigger fights are not going to be the nomination fight. The fight is going to be what are the rules going to be for 2020.
What do you think will happen? What in terms of those rules?
I have no idea. I really don't. All I know is that Ted Cruz is a very smart man. Of all of those 16 Republicans that were running for president, he was the one who early on was planning the convention strategy. He was with his team of lawyers looked at what could be done. And they're of course looking to run him he's looking to run 4 years from now. So the you give the fight for the nomination. I mean, Trump's won it, so okay, he's won it. But what happens with the rules? What kind of dynamic do they have? And I can't tell you, but I can tell you there'll be a fight over the rules.
Yes, well, that'll be very interesting. Progressive Republicans who say, a couple of them have said, this will destroy the party, and it should. Please, everybody addressing other Republicans, please vote against him because we have to crash the party in order to remake it from the bottom up. Do you think that that's the right approach? And if so, how does that happen? Do you think should start a brand new third party? What's your experienced feeling about that?
First of all, I don't think there are any progressive liberal Republicans left. I could say there's some moderates, but if you can name one, Susan Collins is not a progressive liberal. She's a moderate to conservative. Mark Kirk in Illinois is certainly not. I don't know if there are no progressive liberals left in the Republican Party, certainly that I know about. Progressive, of course, with the Republicans came out of Teddy Roosevelt's time.
Right. All of this has changed hugely. No, I mean, go back. I remember when Jacob Javits and Mayor Lindsay were, these were progressive people. And Olympia Snowe, of course, I guess, left Congress, left the Senate because she couldn't stand it anymore, too. But things are really bad when Mary Madeline leaves, because she's not a progressive person at all, and she couldn't stand it.
That's a very good example. Mary Madeline is a conservative. And the battle outside of this Trump battle is between the evangelical religious right conservatives and the old traditional conservatives. And the thing that distresses me is the use of the term moderate. I'd like to know where the moderates are in not only progressive liberals. Where are the moderates in the Republican Party? I don't see them.
Yeah,
I don't know where they are.
Yeah. In the book, you are very interesting as you dissect and take us through bit by bit the takeover by the religious right of the Republican Party. We need the two-party system. I mean, if the Republican Party goes down or moves so far to the right, then the Democratic Party moves to the right, too. Everything shifts. And so, that was quite frightening and still is, that religious takeover.
I think that if the nation has some luck, we don't get a major attack. We don't have something that really is very horrendous happening right through to November. Hillary will be elected because I think the campaign will be fought on fear. And the argument that some people are making about, well, we have to let the party fall so we can rebuild it, in the same way that I remember the defeat of '64, the party will be rebuilt, but it will be rebuilt at the state and local level, and it will do well. The American public will respond if things are done. If they modify, whoever's in power modifies Obamacare, makes it more easy for people who are finding it harder to pay their premiums, deals with the education issue, and then of course the big one is climate change. We all know that, right. and our country seems to go through these crazy nervous breakdowns about every 35, 40 years, and I think we will deal with it again. But it makes me angry that we have to do this. I don't know why we can't respect our institutions and not have those kind of things that happen.
This convulsion.
But on a positive note, I am so pleased that at last we are going to run a wonderful woman for president. I remember being back there at that convention, I think it was the 76 one, where we decided, we Republican feminists, that we were going to run a woman for president. And I called one of my friends in one of the news places. I said, you got some data on whether or not the American people will vote for a woman for president? And my friend called back and he said, well, we got a little bit of Gallup data. If you use it with just, will you support a woman for president, I think it was 60% were against. However, if you put qualified, the figure went down to about 50-51, and we had friends in the Texas delegation, and we really tried to put Am Armstrong on the ballot.
Right. Well, I mean, that this day has been worked for by women on both sides of the aisle and nowhere near the aisle for an awfully long time. So thank you for that effort, whatever happened
to it. And Robin, I said president. We were trying to run her for vice president with Jerry Ford.
Right. Well, whatever. We were trying for anything at that point. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I hope we can come back to you and tap into your wisdom yet again, because the work that you have done is wonderful, and the history, which is really not known by many people, who think that the Republican Party was always what it is now, and that's so not true. For that matter, the Democratic Party was not always what it is now. So they've shifted positions on many things, on sex, on race, on being progressives, and it's very helpful to know the context. And thank you for all your work, and thank you for the book, which again is called The Republican War Against Women, and which you can get and find out how we got to this point.
Thank you, Robin.
Time for one last pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'll be back in just a second or two with some fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back to some fighting words. I told you we'd stay on the story of Fox News anchor Gretchen Carlson's lawsuit against the Fox News head, media power broker and Republican Party kingmaker Roger Ailes. You'll remember that Carlson claims she was fired because, in effect, she hadn't come across sexually for Ailes. He claims her contract wasn't renewed because her show had low ratings, a perfect fact-free Fox News statement, since she had a 33% rise in her viewership just before her firing, making her show the #1 rated cable news show in its time slot. Meanwhile, more than a dozen women have now contacted Carlson's attorney, Nancy Erica Smith, with detailed allegations of sexual harassment by Roger Ailes, both at Fox and over a 25-year period dating back to when he was a producer on The Mike Douglas Show. Just some samples. Kelly Boyle, former Republican National Committee field advisor, found herself alone in a car with Roger Ailes when he said, quote, if you want to play with the big boys, you have to lay with the big boys. Boyle says, I was trying to kill time because I didn't know if he would attack me, so I stalled and said, would I have to be friends with anybody else? And he said, well, you might have to give a blowjob every once in a while. I told him I was going to have to think about this, but he said, no, if you don't do it now, that means you won't. The next morning I show up to get my assignment and was told the guy I was supposed to be meeting with was unavailable. Weeks later, I called a friend high up with the Republican National Committee and asked him what happened, and he said, word went out that you weren't to be hired. Another woman stated, quote, I was 16 years old and sent over for a walk-on part on the Mike Douglas show. It was 6:30 in the evening and the place was closing up. Ailes took me into his office and locked the door and pulled down his pants, pulled out his genitals and said, kiss them. I jumped up, but the door was locked. He chased me around the office, but finally pulled up his trousers, and he said to me, don't you dare tell anybody about this. I've got it all on tape. She was 16. A former TV producer stated, I remember that his clear message was, if you want to make it in New York City in the TV business, you're going to have to F me, and you're going to do that with anybody I tell you to. I remember running out of that apartment and standing on the sidewalk crying. It goes on. The sexually exploitative attitude of Roger Ailes apparently suffuses Fox News, from the requirement that on-set desks be see-through plastic and women allegedly required to wear only skirts, not slacks, all the way to attitudes and comments on air by male anchors and correspondents. Nor is Gretchen Carlson alone in expressing anger at this sexist climate, although Ailes called her a man-hater who had to learn to get along with the boys for doing so. Megyn Kelly, who took on Donald Trump for his sexism but later made peace with him at the demand of Roger Ailes, had earlier confronted Fox commentator Eric Erickson for saying that the male typically is the dominant role in nature. Nor is this the first sexual harassment suit at Fox. When, in 2007, reporter Catherine Herridge complained to Fox she was subjected to disparate pay and unequal employment opportunities because of her gender and age, which was 41, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission backed her up. On the other side, Greta Van Susteren, who has for years claimed to be an independent feminist working inside the lines of the enemy, went on record defending Ailes, claiming that Carlson is, quote, disgruntled she didn't get her contract renewed, close quote. You know, for a long time we've cut Van Susteren some slack for her participation in foxiness at all, but enough. By taking this position, she has blown all claims to legitimacy as a feminist. Enough indeed. There is a problem with Carlson's legal case because it's based on claiming that she was retaliated against by rebuffing his demands, as opposed to focusing on the sexual harassment and remedying the underlying discrimination. This reflects a trend in discrimination cases over the last decade or so. One reason is that it seems easier to win a retaliation claim, because not all juries will view hostile or demeaning behavior as such, while they do at least intuitively understand retaliation. Smith, Carlson's lawyer, stated, it's easier for even men on juries to understand retaliation. Of course, this works if you're only out for yourself and your own case, but if you want to ensure that wrongdoing in the workplace gets corrected, then the retaliation focus is problematic. Ailes, of course, is pushing for arbitration, which has to be private rather than responding in court. But interestingly, he will have to defend himself this time not only against Carson's legal challenge, but against an outside law firm that Fox News' parent company, 21st Century Fox, is hiring to conduct its own internal investigation. See, all these years, Ailes has been protected by his powerful patron, Fox owner and global media mogul Rupert Murdoch. But Murdoch's sons at Fox have different political and corporate attitudes, which apparently Ailes can no longer dismiss as political correctness. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter. Unfortunately, none of the Murdochs have a Twitter account, but Van Susteren does, simply at Greta, Greta, and be sure to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMClive.com. There you can find the show, plus the archive of all our previous episodes. And we're at iTunes worldwide. There you can stream, download, and subscribe to the show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Regina K. Scully is our founding sponsor. Julie Burton, Women's Media Center President, is executive producer. And I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Don't forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.